You've heard of Elf on the Shelf, but have you heard it crawling through the air ducts? It's time for the Friday Nightmare. This week we are going to do a multi-part long short story from my first collection, The Rook Circle. This is my Krampus tale, Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag. Jamie walked along the side of the road. He was cold, but stubborn 10-year-old pride wouldn't let him put on the bright orange jacket he was carrying by his side. His dad had insisted he take it with him, otherwise he might get sick. Jamie rather bitterly admitted that he might have slightly overestimated his resistance to exposure, but this was a matter of principle. Besides, the store wasn't far. Christmas was a day away, though Jamie was far too old for any baby stuff about Santa Claus and reindeer. He was happy enough to get presents so long as his parents followed his list. They always ended up adding something else from Santa under the tree, usually something small and practical. Actually, that little MP3 player last year had been pretty sweet. It was preloaded with audiobooks and Doctor Who radio plays, so they wouldn't take up space on his phone. Of course, they could have just gotten him a phone with a bigger memory, but it did make walks like these more of a pleasant outing than a chore. His earbuds buzzed with time travel adventures. Jamie smiled. Hopefully they would be done at Grandma's in time to get home and watch the Christmas special tomorrow. Far enough from his house where he was certain his dad couldn't see him, Jamie shrugged into his coat. He was so happy to find his dad had stuck mittens in the pockets he almost forgot to be annoyed for the condescending treatment. Didn't he know that Jamie could take care of himself? The walk to the nearby store wasn't blessed with a sidewalk, and Jamie's feet were cold from the soggy grass. His mother was working at the hospital tonight so she could spend Christmas Day with them, and then left all the cooking and cleaning and last-minute Christmas errands to his father. Jamie's dad was a pretty good guy, even occasionally cool when he wasn't being embarrassing, but he had a very deadline-driven approach to everything that usually left him scrambling to finish. Hence Jamie's regular trips to pick up ingredients and supplies his father had forgotten. Jamie didn't mind, really. He liked getting out of the house, even if it was cold. Most of his friends from school had out-of-town Christmas plans, and the ones that didn't were all busy hosting relatives who had come in. There wasn't anything much to do as far as having a good time, and all his video games were old and stupid since his parents wouldn't buy him anything with Christmas coming up. He might act put upon, but this was heaps better than listening to his dad talk to himself as he moved back and forth through the kitchen and through the dining room. He finally reached the first of the shopping centers that abutted the series of apartment complexes he called home. The walk to the store was a little less than a mile round trip, but it was a strange walk. Half of it was a grassy field next to the little compartment building complex, and the other half was like a little miniature city. Still, it was well lit and safe enough that Jamie had been fetching things for his dad for a year now. Over the sounds of the doctor and Charlie Pollard running from Cybermen, Jamie noticed a loud ringing noise. He pulled his earbuds out to make sure there wasn't an ambulance or something coming towards him, and was relieved to see it was just a woman dressed as Santa, ringing a bell and holding up a pail for donations. The sign next to her urged people to give for those who had nothing, and Jamie figured he'd drop the change from his purchases into her bucket. It was a nice thing to do. Welcome to part 2 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag. The ringing got louder and more annoying as he walked towards her. She was between the pharmacy and the grocery, a prime place to pick up people running errands. The Girl Scouts did the same thing with their cookie stands each year. Jamie wanted to put his earbuds back in, but he didn't want to look like a jerk. "Merry Christmas, young man," said the woman. "Make a donation." Up close, Jamie didn't really like the look of the woman. She was very large and doughy, her mouth a nearly round hole between her puffed cheeks. The Santa suit fit her frame admirably, but the cheap white wig and the hat looked clownish over her visible black bangs sticking out from underneath them. She smelled like cooking wine, and one arm was bandaged with a dirty wrapping. "I'll drop my change in when I get back from the store," he promised. "God bless you, handsome," she said, with an unpleasant wink. "I'll be waiting here." Jamie walked on, thinking the woman was a little creepy. He plugged in once more and was grateful to enter the store and its warmth. He shopped quickly from the list his dad had made, and then wandered around looking at the Christmas stuff while he waited for the audio story to end. A buzzing in his pocket alerted him of a text from his dad, asking him if he was okay, and reminding him that he needed the tomatoes and peppers within the next half hour or so. Jamie replied he was on his way back, paid at the register, and walked back out with his sack of groceries. Heading back, he spied the woman with the bell again, and awkwardly tried to switch the heavy sack to one arm while digging in his jeans for change with his other. The operation wasn't going very smoothly, and soon he was just standing in front of her, fumbling like a juggler who had forgotten how to juggle. Exasperated, he yanked out his earbuds again and set the bag on the ground to free up his hands. The woman laughed in a way that was probably meant to be kindly but sounded mean in Jamie's ears. Finally, he extracted all of 65 cents for his troubles, and the woman once again passed along the blessings of God. This time she called him Tiger, and Jamie didn't like it any better. He bent to pick up his groceries, but stopped, staring at the sidewalk. He missed it when he had come by the first time, but now in the low afternoon light he couldn't keep his eyes off it. In colored chalk was a picture of a large man with a bag draped over his back. It wasn't Santa, though. This man's skin was black with red eyes. Instead of a Coca-Cola red suit, he wore rags and goat horns grew from his forehead. His mouth was open, and a long pink tongue snaked out. "What the heck is that?" asked Jamie before he could stop himself. "That, Tiger, is the Krampus," said the woman, giggling a high-pitched giggle. "You ever hear of the Krampus?" "No," said Jamie. He was sorry he said anything. "He's like the dark Santa Claus," said the woman. "While Santa is our gift-giving presents to good boys and girls, Krampus is out leaving switches and belts in the stockings of the bad ones so their parents will have something to beat them with. If a girl or boy was particularly bad, Krampus would pop them in his sack and take them with him or her to home to eat. That's how you got kids to mind back in the old days. You had to teach them respect. Most parents are too scared of political correctness these days to correct their kids properly. I see them all the time going back and forth without showing me, their elder, the proper respect." "You seem really good, though, donating your change and talking like you should. Surprised you don't know more about the Krampus. Suppose he doesn't get much work these days. Everyone's too damn liberal." Welcome back. This is part 3 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag. Jamie was at a loss. He'd never heard this story, and his parents had damn sure never spanked him, let alone hit him with a belt. He wondered what a switch was. Like a light switch? Why would you hit someone with that? Whatever the case, he wanted to get the hell away from this weird woman and go home. So he wished her a Merry Christmas and added "ma'am" for good measure. Then walked past her, with the ringing of her bell following him. It wasn't until the ringing was out of earshot he felt safe enough putting his story back on, but honestly had lost some of its appeal. Fish people in 23rd century Venice wasn't very scary anymore. He couldn't get the graffiti out of his head, and it wasn't until he was almost at his own doorstep that he realized what was bothering him. His shoes kept squelching in soggy, unpaved ground from last night's rain, but the sidewalk had been dry enough for a clear chalk drawing. That woman must have drawn it. What a weirdo. "Dad, I'm home," shouted Jamie as he came through the door. "I got everything you asked for." His dad rounded the corner from the kitchen and took the bag. He was a small man who buzzed with energy. Jamie quickly handed him the sack and watched, amused, as his dad sprinted back to the kitchen. Leaning in the doorway, Jamie admired his father's typical and insane manner of putting the groceries away as he dumped everything on the floor and then hurled items left and right into their proper place. One day, Jamie hoped he'd have that dexterity. Even when the loaf of bread his dad had tossed onto the counter started to slide off, his dad managed to catch it in one hand and toss it back into place while putting away a tin of rosemary in the other on the same motion. "Crap!" his dad shouted as he suddenly ground 2 cans of beans into his eye sockets. "Crappity crap, crap, damn it, crap!" "What?" asked Jamie. "Potatoes," his dad said. "I forgot to tell you potatoes, and I need red potatoes for the mashed potatoes. And milk." Jamie saw where this was going. "Couldn't you just use some instant mashed potatoes?" he asked. "We've got some. I saw them yesterday. Graham won't even notice." Dad removed the cans from his eyes and let his arms dangle while he stared at his son with his head cocked. A silent couple of seconds ticked by. "Well, she won't," pleaded Jamie. "And how many of your Christmas presents would you like to wager on that hypothesis?" his father asked. Jamie had to admit that his Graham would probably notice. She wouldn't say anything overt about it, but he'd probably hear a lot of comments about how it was a shame his mom wasn't around as much to help out at the house, and maybe if she was, then his dad wouldn't be so stressed for time to cook, and... yeah, Dad needed potatoes. And milk. Jamie sighed. "Look, Jamiroquai," he said, using one of those completely inexplicable pet names he seemed to have an endless supply of. "I'd drive over to myself and do it real quick if I could, but this stuff has to be tended. The roast is coming out in 10, and that sauce needs stirring, etc., ad infinitum. I promise this is the last trip today. Anything else, I'll just endure the wrath. Come on, please, help me out." Jamie made a big show of putting his mittens on and dramatically holding out his hand for $20. His dad crossed his palm with paper money, and Jamie turned to leave. Suddenly his dad hugged him from behind. "I appreciate it, Jamie," he said. "I really do. Why don't you get yourself a dessert or something with a change, and we'll let you open a present tonight when Mom gets home. And I swear we will leave Grand's in time to get home for Doctor Who tomorrow. Okay?" All right, said Jamie, shrugging out of the hug. "I'll take care of it for you. Last trip, though. If you think of anything else you need, you've got about 15 minutes to text it to me." Welcome to part 4 of the Christmas special of the Friday Nightmare. Everybody's waiting for the man with the bag. "Yes, Commodore," said his dad. "Try to hurry. I'm worried about the dark on the road." "I know," said Jamie. "I'll go fast." Back outside, the sun was already hidden behind the buildings, and the street lights were starting to come on. The temperature was also dropping dramatically, and Jamie briefly thought about going back in for his hat real quick. Instead, he zippered up his jacket and began another trudge to the store. Cars with their headlights on streaked past him. Jamie didn't like to admit it, but he was a little worried. For as long as he could remember, his dad had pounded in the fact that holidays were full of drunk drivers having too good a time to notice they were so blitzed that they were a danger to themselves and others. It was one of the reasons he had this stupid orange, but thankfully very warm, coat in the first place. It made him easy to see, but he was always very mindful of the fact that any of these cars could have a drunk behind the wheel, ready to jump the curb and take out anything in their path. He edged a little farther from the road, even if it did take him into the slushier ground. He hoped someone had gotten him proper rain boots for Christmas, and congratulated himself on such an adult thought. Wanting to pay attention to the road, he refrained from putting on another story until he reached the shopping center and the safety of the paved sidewalk in front of the stores. He flipped through the MP3 player to find A Christmas Tale. This one was about a house that came to life and endlessly replayed a murder mystery on Christmas Eve, one of his favorites. Lost in the story, he had forgotten about the donation woman until he almost blundered into her. She was packing up her pail and things. The stores were all closing in the next half hour, and he guessed she was on her way home. At her feet, the Krampus still leered up into the night sky. Jamie saw her say something at him with an unpleasant smile, but he didn't want to interrupt the story. "Forgot some things for my dad," he said loudly, walking past her. "Gotta get them real quick before the stores close. Merry Christmas." With a wave, he turned his back and walked quickly away from her. There wasn't time to chat, and she freaked him out anyway. The clerks and the stock staff were already tending to their closing duties, hoping to get out of the building as soon as possible. The meat department was all packed up and washed, the deli shut down, and the florist already had her coat on and was playing on her phone until the time to leave came. There were just enough red potatoes for his dad's recipe, milk to spare, and Jamie took a few minutes to help himself to a big tin of Christmas candy. "I should get you to text me your shopping list," said the manager, who liked the boy, who was in so often for his forgetful dad. "We could compare notes and maybe you wouldn't need to take 2 trips. "Nah, I'm okay," said Jamie. "It's a short walk, and it gets me out of the house." "Not to be all candy from strangers or anything, but it's getting cold and dark," said the manager. "Would you like a lift home? We're going to have the lights off in 10 minutes. "I'll be home by then," said Jamie. The man was nice enough, but years of stranger danger leaves kids habitually prone to erring on the side of caution when it comes to adults. Besides, he'd done this 100 times. "Okay, Jamie," said the manager. "Be safe, and happy holidays." "You too," replied Jamie, and he turned to walk out. Night comes quickly in winter, and for a second Jamie thought seriously about going back inside and taking the manager up on his offer of a ride. He wasn't scared, of course, not at all, but it was cold and dark, and there were drunks on the road. He was still thinking about that when the lights went off behind him. Now there were only pools of hazy illumination from the weak streetlights. It was weird how they seemed to be too high up in the air for the light to get all the way down to the ground. Welcome to part 5 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag, our Friday Nightmare Christmas special. That's stupid, thought Jamie. With a snort, he gripped his shopping bag and started walking home. The shops were all shuttered, and only a few managers' employees were hurrying through the parking lot under the hoods and hats to leave behind the whole working mess and spend time with their families. The only one on the sidewalk was Jamie, hurriedly skulking home. Something about the night was getting to him. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it was putting him on an edge. The sky above was overcast and let down no light from the stars or moon. The air was electric with cold, and the gate to the complex looked like it was on the other side of the planet. Every car that cruised by sounded like it was cutting the wind with a knife, almost like the evening itself was screaming. "Come on, get it together," Jamie said to himself. He was a big kid, practically an adult. Being afraid of the dark was for babies. He had just passed the store when he noticed a light off to his right, It was a bright and warm light, but faint. He paused for a second until he realized he was standing on the face of the Krampus drawn on the sidewalk. Weirded out, he moved off, but when he did so, the bag of groceries loudly ripped. The potatoes and milk hit the sidewalk with a soft thud, but the tin of candy made a loud banging noise. Jamie dropped to his knees quickly to try and gather up his belongings. He cursed himself for forgetting the canvas bags his mom was always on him to use. Better for the environment, anyway. The sound of shuffling feet startled him, and Jamie looked up. The donation woman was standing over him, grinning down. "Need some help there, Tiger?" she said, with her lips stretched over her teeth. No, I've got it," said Jamie. "Are you sure?" she said. "Maybe I've got another bag back here. You want another bag?" Jamie really didn't. He wanted to go home right now, even if it meant carrying his groceries awkwardly. The woman stepped over him and scooped up the tin of candy that he dropped. She looked at it a while, licking her lips. "Come on, Tiger," she said. "I've got loads of stuff to help you. You being so nice and all." And with that, she reached down and grabbed Jamie under one arm to hoist him up. The gesture felt anything but friendly, and her grip was like iron as she pushed towards the alley between the grocery store and the drugstore. Jamie stumbled to keep his feet, and around the corner was a small barrel full of burning trash. The woman's donation bucket and other items were stuffed into a loaded shopping cart that was stacked with wrapped plastic bags full of items until it was taller than she was. On the ground next to it was a filthy sleeping bag. Jamie turned, but the woman blocked the alley behind him. She was reaching into the candy tin and happily sampling some of the chocolates, loudly licking her fingers by shoving them one by one as deep into her mouth as she could before slowly withdrawing them. The gesture was beyond gross. "There's sacks in that bag hanging on the end," she said. "Go on and get you one." Jamie hurried over past the fire and snatched one of the bags. As quickly as he could, he stuffed the potatoes and the milk in and turned to walk away. The woman was leaning against the brick wall with his candy. "You sure you don't want to stay and keep a girl company?" she asked, dark chocolate smeared around her mouth. "I'm all alone on Christmas, lonely and cold and looking for someone to talk to. There just aren't any boys like you that walk past me these days. Nice, sweet boys that show an elder the proper respect." Welcome to part 6 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag, the Friday Nightmare Christmas special. Jamie was pretty much beyond speaking now. He just shook his head and started almost sprinting past her. He thought he made it when her hand grabbed him around the collar of his jacket and yanked. He stumbled backwards and fell next to the burning barrel. In the firelight, she looked huge and ogreish. She was still licking her lips. "You didn't say thank you for the bag," she said. "I thought you were a good boy." Oh, sure, now you say thanks," said the woman. "Little shits like you always remember your manners when you're reminded. I shouldn't have to remind you. You should just know." The woman reached down to her waist and unbuckled the wide leather strap of the belt of her Santa suit. Free from support, her pants fell down around her ankles and she stepped out of them. Her legs were hairy and smeared with things Jamie didn't want to know about. In her hand, she wrapped the belt tightly and then swung hard. The buckle clanged against the barrel, and Jamie covered his head and screamed. The sound came again and again and again until he was sobbing. Once again the woman reached down and hauled him up to his feet. She brought her face close to his and licked him up the side. Her breath was rancid and vile, only bearable thanks to the candy she'd taken from him. She started whispering in his ear. "You're going to learn something now," she growled. "You're going to learn how to treat a lady like me and what happens if you don't." With one hand, she reached down and started fumbling at his jeans. Trembling like a leaf, he weakly slapped at her hands, but was powerless against the adult. He was crying and frightened, and he just wanted to go home. Suddenly, a new sound filled the alley. It was hard to describe, but Jamie could have swore someone had just ripped off a very large adhesive bandage. The ripping noise bounced around the stone alley like a ricocheting bullet, and for a moment the woman stopped her attack while still holding him too tight to escape. She was a beast of a human, this woman, and something of the beast in her knew there was danger. She glanced left and right, searching for the source. Jamie was still shaking so hard that it was like a seizure, and it took him a minute to realize it wasn't just fear. Cold had descended even harder than it already was. Above him, fat snowflakes began to fall out of nowhere. A heap of snow came crashing down to douse the firelight, and everything went dark. He felt himself being flung aside and collapsed against the wall. The woman turned and pulled a long, serrated kitchen knife from under her sleeping bag. She was still naked from the waist down, but didn't seem to mind either the cold or the dark. She was ready to fight, not flee. "Who's out there?" she shouted. "I don't have a problem with you. Just leave a poor woman alone, or you'll be shitting out of a hole in your stomach." The only answer was a low growl and a huge rustle. The snow was falling thicker now, and Jamie looked up at the woman, half obscured by the curtain of falling snow. It had quickly covered his mittens, but he noticed that he didn't smell anything like the usual dirty, wet stuff that came from the city's skies. Nervously, he held his hand under his nose and sniffed them. It wasn't snow. It was chalk. Ice-cold chalk. But still chalk. Welcome to part 7 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag, the Christmas special for this year's Friday Nightmare. Ahead of him, a shadow detached itself from the others. It seemed to be blackness itself, moving until Jamie had the sense to look further up. The shape was easily 20 feet tall, and its eyes were narrow, red, and mad. Against the sky, Jamie could make out huge, curved horns. Across the shape's back, something that pulsed and writhed was held in a large sack. With a grunt, it was slung from over the shape's shoulder and landed on the ground with a strange clicking noise. The woman seemed taken aback for just a second. The Krampus shadow growled low again. "You're nothing," she whispered. "You're nothing." She sprang towards the campus with her knife held out in front of her, only for a huge swatting blow to knock her completely out of the way. The knife flew up into the air and clanged to the ground beside Jamie. He dove for it and held it out in front of him, still afraid to move. The woman groaned on the ground, trying to get up. Fast as dark follows light, the Krampus shadow moved over her, dragging her up into the air with one powerful arm. There she dangled, legs kicking and splitting at the beast that held her. Rather than a growl, this time it roared, an old sound of the woods and the tundra that froze prey with fear in its tracks. Leaning down, the Krampus used his other hand to untie the sack he laid on the ground. The opening yawned wide, and inside it, Jamie could see skulls. So many tiny, child-sized skulls. Each one had a small tallow candle where previously the brain had been, and the teeth had been removed. In their places had been driven all manners of sharp things, discarded razor blades, broken glass, and pointed shells, rusty saw edges. Exposed to the night sky, the skulls began snapping and biting, leaping like starving piranha at the dangling woman above them. Jamie put his hands to his ears to block the infernal clicking noise their movements produced. His terrible bag ready to receive, the Krampus reached up and grabbed the top of the woman's Santa suit. With a disgusted, bull-like snort, he ripped it from her body, leaving her nude in the night. He toppled her wig and hat off her head with a dismissive flick of his claw. Jamie wanted to close his eyes, but even the ability to blink seemed to have been taken from him. With another roar, the Krampus hoisted the woman up high by the neck and slammed her down into the sack of biting skulls. Her screams were muffled under the weight of them, but the sack jerked and kicked as they bit into the woman's flesh. The Krampus looked down into the writhing mass, and his long tongue lolled out of his mouth as the struggle continued. Finally, there was silence and the motion stopped. The Krampus withdrew his arm and held a fresh skull, picked clean. He turned and hurled it into the wall, where it shattered into bone dust. And then he looked at Jamie. What expression was on the Krampus's face was impossible to tell. Only his red eyes could be seen, though the fire had gone from a blaze to a low yellow. Jamie watched him reach down to tie up his bag once again. He hoped the creature would spare him the woman's terrible fate, but it started towards him, and Jamie finally fainted from fear as each pounding footstep drew nearer. Welcome to part 8 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag, the Christmas special this year for Friday Nightmare. This will be the final part. We're just going to sprint to the end. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Jamie was edging back into consciousness. For a second, his mind thought he heard the sound of small skulls eating him in small, savory bites. Then he wondered if he was a skull, consuming others with mindless abandon as he listened to the sound of his own teeth cut through the sinew and crack through bone. But it was only the sound of footsteps on gravel. He was being carried in someone's arms. He allowed his eyes to crack open, seeing the color of blue and the word police. His hand darted to his pocket where his MP3 player, full of safe stories about blue police boxes and happy adventures, was still sitting. He rubbed it like a talisman. Whoever was carrying him finally stopped and awkwardly shifted Jamie to one arm so he could knock. It was his own door. "Hello?" said his father. "Dear God, what happened?" Jamie felt himself being given over to his dad, and he clutched at him and wept. They collapsed on the couch together. His father's intricate cooking ritual forgotten in his terror, Jamie sobbed out incoherently until he was out of breath. He finally just allowed himself to be rocked in his dad's arms. "What happened?" he asked. "Your son had a nasty run-in," said the policeman. His voice was soft and romantic with just a touch of old-world accent. "There was a woman posing as a donation collector down by the grocery store. Just a vagrant with a con going on. Apparently she also had a taste for young boys. Good thing I was on patrol down that way. I saw him get pulled into an alley and came running. The woman's gone, but I'll put out a bulletin tonight and we'll keep an eye out to bag her. She doesn't seem hurt, but I'm no doctor." Jamie's dad looked down at his son with a mix of terror and relief. "Thank you, officer," he said. The police paused for a moment, almost as if he didn't know the answer. He finally said, "McGann." "McGann," replied Jamie's dad. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Really?" said the policeman. "I do. Rape, death, news stories, funerals, stuff like that. Gory details aside, that's what would have happened. It's not my place to tell a man how to raise children, sir, but maybe the dead dark of winter is not the place to be sending a boy out for the sake of a sack of potatoes. There are things in the dark, you know." Jamie's dad hung his head. "Still, no harm done, eh?" said the policeman. "He seems unhurt, though scared, of course. You'll want to go down and make a statement tomorrow, but not tonight. Tonight's Christmas Eve, after all. They'll have enough to deal with without someone not in immediate danger." Started his dad. The policeman raised his hand. "No buts," he said. "I'd get the boy to bed if it were me. You'll want to call his mother and tell her everything. I'll be off. Who knows who else will be needing a hand tonight." I lied, we're going to do one more video. Welcome to part 9 of Everybody's Waiting for the Man with the Bag, the Friday Nightmare Christmas special. This really will be the finale, I promise. Jamie watched the big man who had carried him tip his hat to his dad and walk out of their house. For several minutes his dad held him tightly, and for the first time in many years, Jamie was just grateful for the arms of his parent around him. After the policeman left, Jamie's dad let loose his own torrent of sobs and apologies. They held each other for a long time before Jamie finally felt strong enough to tell his dad he wanted to go to bed. His dad nodded and set the boy down. Briefly, he returned to the kitchen to manage a few fires while Jamie pulled out clean pajamas from the warm dryer. He brushed his teeth and then allowed his dad to lead him up to bed. They said goodnight at the door, and Jamie went into the dark room. There in the corner, near the window, sat the Goat Man, the dark saint of winter, the Krampus. He was cross-legged and huge, with his horns touching the ceiling. But if Jamie turned his head just the right way, he could still see the illusion of the policeman that fooled his dad. The Krampus was no shadow, but neither was he fully there. Jamie could see the stitching in his clothes and the hair on his arms, but if he looked hard enough, he could see through these things to the walls and poster behind him. The face was no black shade with burning eyes, but that of an old man. His beard was gray and full, and his face was lined with wrinkles. Even the horns looked commonplace on him. Next to him was the bag. The Krampus looked hard at the boy for a long while. In his eyes seemed to be reflected a sadness and a loss that no human would ever live long enough to understand. "Good evening, summer's child," said the Krampus in a voice low as lost valleys. "It has been a busy one, has it not?" Jamie only nodded. In the distance he could hear his father on the phone to his mother at the hospital begging forgiveness for letting him go out by himself after dark. Jamie started to shake. "Come to my arms, summer child," said the Krampus. "Come sit and talk with me a while ere I move on." Jamie moved slowly towards the giant, his brain full of the woman's grisly end. Nonetheless, the Krampus scooped him up gently and cradled the boy in his massive limbs. Jamie actually found himself relaxed, smelling the old, soft leather of the Krampus's clothes and the sharpness of fir trees that exuded from him. "Knoweth me, summer's child," asked the Krampus. She said you were something evil and mean, replied Jamie. Aye, said the Krampus, that I am. I am evil and cold and cruel, and the worst of bad deaths is old Krampus. No wonder that meat rot knew of me. Like is like after all, but fear nothing of old Krampus, summer's child. Long has it been since brave hearts and good hearts have beat against my skin. I would simply enjoy it if you would allow. Jamie nodded sleepily. What do they call the man who comes tonight? Said the Krampus. The man with the bag, the not me. Say his name. Santa, said Jamie. St. Nicholas. Growled the Krampus. Such small names you have for such thing as a Yogurt-Snodney. Not your fault you are a small people. That is maybe why he loves you so. He is kind, so kind. It is said that it was he who brought you fire from the jealous heavens. Poor, punished giant who walks the wild, frozen waste. I know not, for he has not told me. We meet seldom, he and I have forgotten much since the first meeting in the woods so many centuries ago. I am beast still, the more than just beast. He has wandered the world since you summer children were in your very infancy. When the cold descended and your grandfathers retreated to caves to hide from the winter's wrath, he was there. He found lost children and brought them home. He provided gifts of food and skins and other things less important but no less appreciated. When the nights were so long they seemed to have no end. Always invisible, always glimpsed in passing. The last of the Snataganami, who would not allow the greatest of darkness to consume mankind. He would be the light. The Krampus felt a warm envelope him as he recounted the history of winter to this child. Patience was not his strong point, but he recognized the need to remind humanity of what was at stake in the cold and the dark, and he liked this boy, brave and foolish as he was. He remembered how he grabbed the fallen knife and had watched him fight evil with courtesy at first, so like the Yogurt-Snodney in that way. One day, he realized a terrible thing, the Krampus continued. He understood that where he brought his light, the darkness fled, and with it the things that preyed and struck from the darkness. Driven away, they would still come back to hunt his wards the moment his back was turned. What to do? Fearless, he went in the forest alone without light and found me, the greatest of the night beasts. We fought, and should you ever look upon his true face, you will see it covered in scars of my making. But he tamed me, brought me to heel, and in doing so he cured me of my bestial dumbness. From there he set me to haunt in the dark where he could not go. I was to be the terror that terrors fear, and so I am, summer's child, so I am. The Krampus hugged the boy tightly. All beasts long for touch and affection and love. That was how man tamed them, by playing on their need for a higher hand to tell them they were worthy. The Krampus was long past such necessity, but he envied the love of his master received sometimes. I hunt children, he said. I do. But I hunt those whose the winds tell me will become knives in the dark. I seek those whose childish sadism will grow into adult atrocity. I can smell rot in a soul, and my bag is ready to receive them. It is my part in the design of my master, and I do not regret it. But too rarely are there nights like these, young child of summer, that I feel like the bringer of light. There is no need to thank me for your salvation. In many ways, young child, you are my own. His only reward for the outpouring was a small snore. The beast smiled to himself. It was plenty that the boy had trusted him enough to fall asleep in his arms. More than ever he deserved. With slow gentleness he reached over and laid the lad in his bed. He covered him with the warmest covers and took down the old teddy bear with one eye from the decorative shelf to give him something to hold in his sleep. The Krampus threw his bag of nightmares out the window and clambered out of the opening himself. On the night wind he smelled things. Somewhere a young teenage boy was doing things to his sister that made her meat smell of suicide. Somewhere another young girl was smothering her cat with a cold smile on her face as it died. The dawn was coming, but before it did, the Krampus had business in the dark corners of their rooms. He slung the sack over his shoulders and whistled a song of the woods at the falling snow. Thank you for spending your Christmas Eve with me. Good night.